Oh, I didn't see you there. Welcome back to another season of Crying Out Cloud.
Season 2 of Crying Out Cloud is officially underway, and we could not be more thrilled to have you back listening. Despite our brief hiatus, the clouds have not stopped showering us with an abundance of security incidents and vulnerabilities. We are your hosts, Eden and Amitai, and we are very grateful to have this opportunity to help you, help yourself, deal with the deluge of cloud security news. Quite literally, it is raining outside, so it looks like Season 2 will be...
Cloudy with a chance of vulnerabilities.
Yes, not to be too cliche. So let's dive into our stories for today. Amitai, what's on the docket?
So our first story for today is that Mercedes-Benz accidentally exposed their source code online,
Cool.
which is only the second worst thing to happen to Mercedes recently.
Obviously, second to losing Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
For our second story?
Second story is about Midnight Blizzard, which is a threat actor that managed to breach Microsoft's corporate network and steal their emails.
Rumor has it they were listening to Taylor Swift's Midnights while they were infiltrating.
Maybe. I mean, if assuming Taylor Swift is as big in Russia as she is elsewhere, but who knows?
International pop star.
I like to think that she is.
And our third story is?
On the vulnerabilities affecting Ivanti VPN products.
Which has been a joke around the office because Ivanti in Hebrew quite literally means I understand.
Ivanti.
Which they clearly don't understand.
Ken Ivanti, lo Ivanti.
Okay, let's do this. The first story is the Mercedes-Benz source code exposure, where Mercedes-Benz had a public GitHub repo, and then a researcher found that that repo contained a token for a GitHub user that allowed access to a different internal GitHub server, which also belonged to Mercedes. And then that server, the internal one, held a bunch of credentials for other environments, including keys for their AWS and Azure subscriptions, which is very troublesome. And these credentials were publicly available for like 3 to 4 months, just sitting in the repo.
Which is like a really long time. Like,
especially in cloud years.
Yeah. which are longer than dog years, but shorter than human years.
Yeah, somewhere there.
Like 3 to 4 months is probably long enough for a bunch of different people to find this, either just by manually searching on GitHub, or you have scanners that people are running, both good and bad, looking for stuff on the internet all the time. It's almost unimaginable that nobody else found this before the researcher found this.
That's crazy. And then what's also even crazier is that this token allowed for pretty much unrestricted and unmonitored access to source code hosted on the enterprise server.
Yeah, at least according to the researcher who found this.
What was in these repos?
So there was a lot of intellectual property, like blueprints and design docs, stuff like that, for whatever products Mercedes was using this GitHub repo to design and code. But there were also a lot of secrets, like credentials for other services and cloud access keys, API keys, passwords. So basically this could have allowed lateral movement to a bunch of other environments that Mercedes was using. I don't think the researcher proved that they were actually able to reach those other environments, but I mean, we can assume that they were able to, and this probably could have been pretty damaging if a bad actor had found this.
And this also isn't the first time that Mercedes had source code that was exposed.
Yeah. I think in 2020, there was another case where Mercedes' parent company, someone found a GitLab server, not GitHub, that was also publicly exposed, and they were able to create a new user using a fake, like, Mercedes email address, because they had misconfigured the server to allow basically anyone to sign up without like sending you a confirmation email.
Oh, wow.
So they just created a new account, and then they were able to access everything. And there was also source code for stuff. This specifically was for their OLU, which is like their smart car IoT sort of thing, but also passwords and API tokens. So like this story kind of rings a bell.
Interesting. Are there preventative measures for this setup? Because at the end of the day, these are just a lot of stories about keys being publicly exposed or being left around.
Exactly, scattered. Yeah, like we talk a lot at Whiz
It's
about
me and my keys all the time. I can't find them.
exactly. It's the exact same thing. You need a secret scanner for your
Yeah.
house to tell you where your keys are. So it's like we talk a lot at Wiz about like data hygiene and secret hygiene because like a lot of the cloud vulnerabilities that we found over the years, what made them impactful was the fact that there were credentials lying around that shouldn't be, or that customers in multi-tenant services had access to keys that there's no reason that they should have access to these keys. And the best solution for this really is just to have a really robust secret scanning mechanism and make sure that your secrets are well architectured to only have the privileges that they need, and that you don't have secrets that are being used too widely or by too many people to access the same things.
But also, like Amazon and GitHub have scanners
Yeah.
where they try and identify keys that are, you
Yeah,
know.
fortunately, and I think this isn't something that they have to do, but I think it makes a lot of sense that they do this. It's very valuable to customers. Like Amazon, for example, which is one of many companies that does this, they scan the entirety of GitHub, I think, every day, and then they alert their customers to whenever they find like an AWS access key in a public repo.
And then they put them in jail.
Yes, they sort of limit their permissions.
You're under arrest.
Yeah, it's certainly, yeah, it's like the difference between jail and prison, right? Like they're only there temporarily until you figure out what to do with them. And they basically prevent, like they block the identity associated with that key from being able to do anything that a threat actor might want to do, like launch big VM instance types for crypto mining, for example. So this is something that Amazon does. A few other companies do it. I think every company should be doing this. It makes a lot of sense. And I think GitHub do it as well.
Yeah. The other thing that makes the story stand out is the fact that this key enabled such like successful lateral movement from a code repo to another code repo to a cloud environment. And I think it just like understates how interconnected these systems are. So you need to have your scanning everywhere, and how like even the smallest mistake can be so catastrophic.
Yeah, like exposed keys are really like they can be like the Achilles heel of an entire system.
Yeah.
Because one key leads to one place, that leads to another place, and you can do this sort of lateral movement chain that's cross environment. And these days, since there's so much integration between like classic cloud environments like AWS and Azure and GCP and GitHub and GitLab, so all of these things are sort of becoming part of what we normally call the cloud, right? Like there isn't much of a difference anymore. You have compute here. You can run like GitHub runners and GitHub actions that are also executing code. It's all very, very interconnected, and you have to have secret scanning everywhere, basically, if you want to make sure that you're well protected.
And what does good secret scanning look like?
So that's a good question. There are a lot of different approaches to this. Interestingly, like different secret scanning engines will give different results depending on what you're using. There is a sort of trade-off where if you make secrets very easy to identify, then that increases the chances that you'll find one lying around, but it also increases the chances that an attacker could find it if it's made public. Whereas if your secrets are hard to identify, like if they have a very generic format, for example, then that means that attackers will find it difficult to figure out where they are and what they are and how to use them, but you will also just as easily have difficulty figuring out that something's gone wrong and that they've been exposed somewhere. So this is kind of the trade-off that you kind of want to find the sweet spot.
Fascinating. So, for the Mercedes-Benz story, what are the takeaways?
I think basically scan everything. That's the main thing. You can't afford to not scan for secrets anymore because they could be anywhere. They can be in environmental variables. They can be in files. They can be in bash history. They could be anywhere.
That's why they made that joke in Mean Girls. That's why her hair is so big. It's full of secrets. They were talking about the cloud.
I was going for like a, yeah.
In the musical, of course. And what else about lateral movement paths?
Yeah, so I think nowadays everything, as we mentioned, is very interconnected. It's very complex. You need to have good visibility into the like identity level of each of these different environments, and you need to have them like since they are interconnected, you need to be able to figure out those connections. You need to have visibility into those connections.
Yeah, they can get crazy. They can be zigzaggy.
You can get from here to there, from here to there.
Yeah. For our second story, we have emails stolen from Microsoft by Midnight Blizzard, which is Microsoft's name for Nobelium. Pretty much what happened was a few weeks ago, Microsoft found another incident in their environment. This time it was targeting Microsoft themselves. And according to them, it didn't hit their customers. But what happened was a Russian actor, Midnight Blizzard, which is the famous group responsible for the SolarWinds attack, they managed to basically find one misconfigured account that had a weak password and no MFA. And then they used that to pivot into Microsoft's corporate account, where they started to read emails of Microsoft employees, but specifically senior staff and teams that were in charge of researching Russian threat activity. So they pretty much wanted to know the juice that Microsoft has on them, or what Microsoft's up to regarding them, which is pretty clever.
Yeah, like which operations they're aware of, which tools they're aware of, probably, yeah.
It's good reconnaissance. And then Microsoft found out about them being in their environment after they succeeded in stealing some emails.
Yes.
This also follows on the heels of news that came out a few months ago that Microsoft was hit by a Chinese threat actor that stole a signing key and used that to steal emails from the US government, which is on a different podcast episode if you're so inclined. But what's crazy about this, beyond the fact that they succeeded in doing it, is that they didn't leverage very novel techniques to do it.
Yes. In fact, they were using the same techniques that Microsoft is basically warning people about for a while.
How was Microsoft able to identify it?
So that's a good question. Their blog post doesn't really say. They kind of just mention that they found this in their logs. It's hard to know exactly what tipped them off. But one of the reasons this was probably difficult to identify, and also the reason that it makes it hard to talk about this, with other customers and try to help them figure out if this is targeting them, is that you can't rely on simple indicators of compromise in this case, because the attackers were using residential IP addresses, which basically means that they were able to hijack IP addresses in all sorts of like internet service providers that you or me could be using, and then they routed their traffic through that,
So
and then they switched them up, right?
Like behavioral
Yes,
IOCs.
Exactly. Like you have to rely on TTPs that Microsoft does a very good job of listing in their blog post, but basically identifying lateral movement based on OAuth apps within Entra ID, which is very complex. You really have to know what you're doing to do it properly there. But there are stuff that people can look for, and like there are rules that you can run against your logs if you have logs.
So that's all to say that the best solution is prevention.
Probably. Like in this case, the root cause was an account with no MFA and a weak password.
Which should have triggered an alert.
Yeah, like somebody should be monitoring for these kind of things, or at the very least, make sure that if you have these in their environment, they shouldn't have permission to do anything, because they're probably going to be compromised at any moment.
Totally.
And this also kind of goes to show the importance of cross-environment lateral movement paths and how important that is to prevent, because there's no reason that you should have something in a test account being able to access something in the corporate or production account without anybody noticing.
Sounds like contamination.
Yeah, like cross-environmental contamination.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But Microsoft having their own identity issues, it's not new.
Yes. Yeah, we had Bing Bang,
Yeah.
which was a misconfiguration in Azure. We recently found a case where a SAS token had been misconfigured to allow write access to AI data. Yeah, and like Microsoft, we've already shown in a few cases in our own research and in others' research that they make mistakes that their customers are almost certainly making as well. Like the systems they design are complicated.
Yeah.
And that just increases the chance that someone somewhere will make a mistake. There will always be mistakes, but the cost, the impact of the mistake.
Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has those days. Do you know that song, or is that a different generation? It's Miley Cyrus.
Okay.
From Hannah Montana.
I was just too old enough to know.
Yeah, I was just right for that one. Continue.
Everybody makes mistakes. But the impact of the mistakes needs to be minimized, right?
Yeah. Speaking of minimizing it, what's good about this and what Microsoft was able to successfully achieve is that customers weren't impacted.
Yes.
We do not envy Microsoft's position to support so much of the world's cyber infrastructure, and so there's, in a sense, like some inevitability of...
Like they're going to be targeted, no matter what. And their security guys are going to be targeted, no matter what.
Yeah. So I think we can look to see like how much they're able to minimize the impact as a metric for success.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is my favorite part of the story because I think it's super interesting how the SEC has responded recently to incidents. And they came up with a new rule, which says that if you're a public company, you have to come forward and like share what happened. And yeah, that's a super like new regulation, which kind of shows like a new frontier of the SEC being a lot more
aggressive. Have teeth.
Yes.
In terms of,
Calling
at least
shots.
in cyber. Yeah.
Yeah, we like that. Is there anything else that's important to mention about this new regulation?
So it's for those who are looking for specificity, it's item 1.05 of the existing 8K form, which is the form that companies use to report things that shareholders need to know in case it might affect the stock. So this new item is specifically for cybersecurity incidents that are deemed material, and they have 4 days from the moment they deem something as material.
Business days or weekends too?
I think it's business days.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have a holiday, you're okay. You have time to respond. Yeah, so I think it's 4 days from the moment they decide something is impactful to the moment they have to declare this.
And if you want the layman's version of getting the information from this new regulation, there's a Twitter account called Security Tracker with an 8 instead of an A.
Mm-hmm.
And they post every time one of these disclosures happens. It's nifty.
Yeah, it's a good way to know whenever something potentially embarrassing has happened to a public company.
4 days delayed.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the takeaways from the Midnight Blizzard story?
So I think I would say that Entra ID is complex and OAuth is complex, and it's ripe for exploitation just because there's a very high chance you'll make a mistake. It's important to know what you're doing. It's important to have automation in place that scans things for misconfigurations, and it's really important to have visibility so that you can find things before they get bad.
Yeah. And if you want to know more, you can also read our blog post, which we'll link in the bio. And also, this got lots of good attention from Azure researchers. So there's plentiful material on the internet.
Yeah, the good thing about whenever stuff like this happens is that Microsoft learns from them and they get better, and they're really good about sharing their own investigation findings and their own lessons learned, and this makes the cloud safer for everybody, and it's just a really good learning opportunity because everybody sort of dives into this, tries to figure out what happened, try to figure out how they could have prevented it, what sort of security rules to put in place. So there are always good sides to whenever stuff like this happens.
We're looking at the glass half full.
Mm-hmm. The cloud half full.
Oh, nice. Okay, and now for something completely different, the Ivanti vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Ivanti is a company that has a bunch of VPN products. They are pretty much like appliances you can attach to your networks, which recently they have published quite a few vulnerabilities. And it is supposed that they are being exploited in the wild. What do these do? They allow for remote code execution and authentication bypass, i.e. a login without a username and password. There are a lot of scans going on around the internet now looking for exposed vulnerable Ivanti instances. So unless Amitai knows better, it's unclear if these are security companies that are like running their own scans or if it's malicious activity. Do we
Correct.
know?
It's really hard to tell, like, because the scans often look the same. The only difference will be that if it's a bad scan, then if it finds something interesting, then the immediate step afterwards would be to deploy a weaponized exploit. Whereas most security scanners, like good guy scanners, are, shooting blanks.
This all came to light when Mandiant saw exploitations in the wild from a threat actor who they identified as a Chinese threat actor. And then a few other companies piled on to say very similar things.
Yeah, like each company sort of gave their own point of view based on their own customers being attacked by this and being called in to do incident response, and they sort of found variations on basically the same type of attack by the same actor. And eventually, once these vulnerabilities became public, then other threat actors sort of joined in on the fun.
FOMO. They had FOMO.
Exactly.
They didn't want to miss out. But unfortunately, if you have an RC affecting one of these devices, you're kind of in a pickle because like VPN servers are inherently very difficult to secure. What do you do?
They have to be on the internet because they are the door into your environment. So even if your environment is very secure and you're limiting access to things inside the environment only from places you trust, VPN servers have to trust the internet, right? Because your employees could be connecting from anywhere.
VPN servers are inherently difficult to secure, but even more so in the case of Ivanti, when they were using a bunch of software dependencies from 10, 20 years ago, it's even more difficult to secure if they're neglected in a way. And so it's not overwhelmingly shocking that it is riddled with vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I think Kevin Beaumont.
He had a funny tweet.
Yeah, he showed that like he looked into an Ivanti Pulse Connect box, like a VPN, and he showed that they were using like Perl from 2001, which is really old. Every one of these old components obviously has vulnerabilities. They might not all be exploitable within the VPN, but it kind of shows that it's not much of a surprise that things aren't working as expected.
Yeah.
Within the software.
And then Kevin had another funny post about the response to this, which was that CISA had a very unprecedented response. They also brought out their big dogs, and they said that it was mandatory for all agencies using these Ivanti instances to pull the plug on them, factory format them, and then they could plug it back in. So they put a funny GIF. Kevin.
Yeah. Kevin's the master of funny GIFs.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we were speaking before about how the SEC, has more teeth and is being more aggressive, and it looks like CISA is also slowly becoming more aggressive and taking a stronger stance.
More bold moves. It's also kind of an unheard of level of distrust with these like Ivanti instances that even warranted this response.
Yeah, because like it's a very extreme, because
Yeah.
it basically means that they are sort of in panic mode, like they're thinking to themselves, okay, there were 2 vulnerabilities yesterday.
They said, shut it down.
Yeah, there's another today. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah.
Let's take a break here.
Suppose you are using Ivanti in your environment or not. What are the takeaways from this story?
So if you're not using Ivanti, then you probably don't really need to care. If you don't know that if you're using Ivanti or not, then you need to find out. If you are using Ivanti and you know you're using Ivanti, which is the dangerous state to be in, you need to make sure that you're patching these things really quickly, because like there's on average like a new vulnerability being announced recently in these things like every week. Really important to patch them fast, yeah, because people are exploiting them as soon as they're out there. Fortunately, you're probably not going to have like a million instances of this in your environment. You're probably going to have like a server that people can connect to, and it's going to be in a centralized place. Our data shows that this isn't incredibly prevalent in cloud environments. There's only like 2%. I'm guessing this is more of an on-prem thing. And other than that, I will say that there are a few things you can do to make it a bit safer to use in terms of like the unknown RCE that might be on its way. because patching won't protect you from 0 days. But what you can do is you can limit access to the admin panel, which in and of itself exposes a bunch of attack surface. And you can also limit it only to the authentication methods that you're actually using in your organization. So if you're only using 1 out of 5 authentication types, make sure only that one is enabled, because the other 4 might have a bunch of vulnerabilities that you don't want to deal with.
Cool. Noted. So, to summarize the episode, what are the takeaways for all the stories we covered?
So for the Mercedes-Benz story, like we mentioned, secret scanning is really important, so don't skimp on it.
Thank you, Mercedes, for making beautiful cars and letting us learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, both on and off the road.
We're becoming better drivers.
For the Midnight Blizzard story, OAuth and Entra ID and OAuth in Entra ID is incredibly complicated. Everybody makes mistakes. Microsoft also makes mistakes. Their customers also make mistakes. We recommend reading our blog for
It's a good blog.
Yeah, for more practical advice on this. If you don't like our blogs, then there are other companies who have also made blogs about this that are perfectly fine as well. And for the Ivanti vulnerabilities, just make sure you stay on top of new patches because there isn't that much else you can do about it at this point.
And maybe follow Kevin Beaumont for some funny GIFs about it.
Yeah, that's good for your health, generally, not just for your cybersecurity.
Yeah. One thing we wanted to share is that during our Crying Out Cloud podcast break, we launched something really cool, the Whiz Cloud Threat Landscape. It's threats.whiz.io. And it's a public version of the Whiz Threat Research internal threat intel database.
Yeah.
So not only the things we talked about today you could learn more about, but any security incidents we've analyzed.
Yeah. So we document incidents there that we've looked into. We document the techniques that we've identified threat actors using, the malware that they're using. We're also sort of figuring out which technologies are being most targeted by threat actors. So there's a bunch of different views you can look into when you go to the website. It's also very beautifully designed.
I was going to say, it's really one of the coolest looking websites. Everyone should just open threats.whiz.io for their eyes.
It also changes your mouse to a cool retro pink, like websites used to do.
We recommend it. Okay. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe and share a link to the podcast, but not your cloud keys. And as always, if your cloud security strategy is making you cry, don't worry. Just cry out cloud.